There we go. All right, everyone. As I thought, it wasn't showing the entire screen. One of these days, I might eventually get my system set up right, but there we go. I'm streaming at 1080p, but my desktop is 1440p, but for some reason it's not scaling appropriately, so whatever. Oh, because it's... Anyways. Makes sense now to me, but regardless. Let's go ahead and see who's here. Those who are here, go ahead and say so in class discussion. Alright, there's, I think, 11. So that would be everybody. Don't even have to check who. That's good. So, I went ahead and made an audible. There's the 11th, actually. And we're going to spend the majority of today talking about how to design software. We've sort of hinted at it and talked around it, but we really haven't talked about how now we basically have the basics of Java done and over with. You all did quite well on the quiz, so that was good to see. I did take 1 point off if you didn't mention XOR in the short answer question about inclusive and versus exclusive. And more of that was just as to make sure you brought to your attention that you didn't mention XOR. But if there's an issue with that, it's not a big deal. Most everybody got 100% otherwise on true and false in the other questions. So the quiz has been graded. I believe also the design patterns quiz has been graded. That would be quiz 1. So the assignments I have reviewed, but I haven't posted grades yet for you. And the reason I did that is I wanted to talk to you about it. Because realistically, if I was being harsh in grading, the best score would probably have been a 65 out of 100, maybe. And that's on purpose. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I didn't give you detailed instructions on purpose. I wanted to see how creative, how much you were paying attention to what I was talking about, how I broke up code and made more smaller classes. And not many of you did that at all. Or if you did, you only broke it up into 2 classes. And that's fine, but that's the point of this class, is I just wanted to self-evaluate and see where you're at. So when I do go ahead and grade it, it'll be much more lenient. So don't worry about those scores. But I do want to make you aware that those of you who submitted 1 or even 2 classes, that's not really well-designed code. But that's okay. The rest of this class, we're going to work on improving your design ability in object-oriented programming. And that's why I said at the beginning of the class, I'm not really here to teach you Java. You'll learn Java, and I will help you learn, help teach you Java. But the point of this class is not to learn Java. It is to help you learn advanced object-oriented programming. And we just so happen to do it in Java because that's a useful language to have learned and know. So, Are there any questions about that so far? I think it's pretty straightforward. Everybody did turn in assignment 1. I did extend assignment 2. I had some people commenting they were having difficulties getting internet connectivity, so I extended that till midnight. I extended that till midnight. You'll be able to turn those in. And what I'm going to do today is show you how I would approach this assignment 1, and then by default assignment 2 also, in a way that is well designed from an object-oriented standpoint. Many of you did. I don't want to copy and show anybody's code, but many of you did use multiple functions, and that was good to see. But it was still a lot, basically blocks of code that way too complex, and we'll talk about why I say that. So, did anybody have any major difficulties with this assignment other than the parsing? The parsing is more difficult, especially the first couple of times you do text parsing. It is a more in-depth issue. Okay, somebody says their issue or their difficulty was undefined and 0 to 99. So the actual parsing of the text to make sure it was correct. Is that what you mean by that? Oh, the actual validation. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, people are saying the input validation. Okay, that's good. And that's part of the point of this is that's why I gave you so long. I'll answer that question here in a second. But what I was saying is, sorry. I do like having giving you plenty of time to work on the assignment and making it a little bit more challenging, or possibly a lot more challenging than you're used to, and giving you time to look. Test. Okay. Apparently there was a networking hiccup here. I apologize for that. Yeah, it just that's one of the nice things about YouTube is it does handle drop and buffering like that pretty well. Sorry about that. I don't know where I left off. I just happened to notice the networking. What I was saying is that I do like giving you challenging or possibly even more challenging assignments than what you're used to before this class, and giving you time to work on them and look up solutions to those problems on your own. Whether those be from the book or online, as long as you are Stack Overflow, those types of things. As long as you're not explicitly cheating and copying answers from somewhere, then I think getting in the habit of finding code snippets and testing them is good. But that's the one of the keys that I told you about, that when you're looking for answers online, there will be correct answers, but not as correct or fully correct or the best, most correct answers. And so that's sort of a experiential game that you'll have to play, and you'll learn as you go. There is somebody said, I liked the setup because assignment 2 felt like I was able to clean up a lot from the first assignment. Will next assignment be done that way? Next assignment will be in the similar vein. We're going to hold off on assignments for this week, and we'll go ahead and I'll make up new ones. I'm trying to make assignments that aren't inherently difficult, but are beneficial to you. And what do I mean by that? Some of you are in data structures. Some of you have already taken data structures. Some of you are not taking or are not in data structures now, and some of you will not take data structures. So I can't just say, oh, we're going to make a postfix or no, that's not right. Polish notation calculator or something along those lines, like you would in a data structures class. Yeah, I guess it would be a prefix calculator, but regardless. So I'm trying to find good assignments that are structured in a way that give you skills, because one of the things that you may or may not have learned or realized in this assignment is that input validation is hard, and parsing of text to even get the values you want to be able to then validate them is hard. So I do like the idea of giving you skills that are transferable to other classes down the road. Because now when you, let's say you go to Python or C++ or whatever the language is, you'll understand the steps of, oh, I have to read in the data somehow. Then I have to break it apart. What's the way that I break apart this text? Does that make sense to everybody? It's more of a base skill building exercise rather than I'm going to teach you Java or something along those lines. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, what I wanted to do today was just, so I'm sort of cheating and sort of not. I didn't write out the full program. Actually, I mean, it's functional, but there's actually purposely things in it that are not right, so that I would leave it to the reader to improve upon, as the famous quote says in textbooks. So, let's see. All right. As you can see, I have IntelliJ up and running here, and I have a main class. Oh, I don't even need this anymore. And all it does is it creates a logic object, and it runs the logic object. Somebody says buffering. It shows me as fine. I'm streaming at 5,600 kilobits. Okay. Yeah, you might just see buffering. Yeah, okay. So, as you can see, over on the... Let me make sure you can see. Yes, as you can see on the left-hand side, I have a bunch of classes and some interfaces. If you're not familiar with the way it looks. Like I said, I like the project file. Here's the project display, but I recommend personally using the project files view. I think it's a lot cleaner, but that's just personal preference. And now we're going to start getting into how do you design software at a professional level? And that's an interesting question. There's a couple ways in which you could answer that. And the most straightforward one is writing the fastest code possible, the most efficient code. But if you write the fastest code, what does that mean? When I say the fastest code, at you as students and learners, what do you take from that? What does that mean to you? It's sort of a trick question, but it's not. There's multiple answers, I'll put it that way. So when somebody says write the fastest code, what does that mean to you? I mean, obviously to solve a problem. Okay, so we had some like big O of 1. Like, yeah, like you have a program, it runs, it doesn't do anything. Oh, look, it ran the fastest possible. That's not what I mean. I mean, it actually accomplishes the goal. But let's think about it from this perspective. If you're a developer or you're a project manager or a business owner, and I want you to write the code as fast as possible, that's one metric of the speed of the code. How long did it take to develop? And even in then, you can break it down. How many man hours or human hours? I don't know if that's the right phrasing of it. I still think it's man hours, regardless of gender. But how many payroll hours, we'll put it that way. How many payroll hours did it take to complete? How many people worked on it? Okay, that's one metric. Another would be, how many wall clock hours did it take? Now, why do I bring that distinction as different? Wall clock hours, it means real human life time. So, the versus payroll hours. I assume somebody can guess what the difference of those is. Yeah, an answer is how long it takes to get code to the client versus how much you're actually paying to develop the code. That's true, but you're missing the your answer is missing the obvious variable. How many developers do you have working on the code at once? That's the variable there. And obviously, I think you knew that. It just wasn't in the answer. So if you have 100 developers and it takes you 10 days, or you have 10 developers and it takes them 100 days, payroll-wise, that's the same amount of money. I think if I gave the inverse numbers, I think I did. 10 and 100 or 110. Payroll-wise, that's the same amount of hours. But there's additional costs for machines, electricity, health insurance here in the U.S., which that's another issue entirely. The longer it takes, there's balancing act there, and that's basically an MBA type concept. Now, which one would be better from a business perspective in general? Obviously, being able to fulfill the customer's needs as fast as possible. Well, how do you write code with 100 developers in 10 days? Obviously, you're going to have to break up the code into lots and lots and lots of tiny problems that each developer can solve at the same time. And they all combine those solutions of sub-problems into making the final product. And that's the same general concept of what I'm going to show you, because the wall clock sometimes is super important. Let's say you're an NFL team and you're having a match versus your rival, and you set up a new app and everybody can vote what play they want on special teams, and you'll actually do it. That's a silly thing, but I'm just off the cuff here. If the app crashes, well, let's make it there's a raffle. That's a better example. You're an NFL team and you're holding a raffle during the game. If the app crashes at the beginning of the game because of some silly bug, is it worth it for the development team, probably hired by the NFL team, not in-house, to scramble to get a hot fix out really quickly to make it work, regardless of how many developers are on that project? Generally, yes. If they can solve it in 10 minutes, if it's a server-side issue that they can just push code, the app doesn't need updated, there's no question that's a better idea. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, just solve the problem and then sort it out later, basically. Does that concept resonate with everybody? Okay. So, we're not getting to that scale, but it's good to understand the concepts of why you want to break up problems. Because if you have a lot of sub-problems, it not only does it make an individual developer much more likely to be correct in each of their problems, and it makes it more testable. What it makes it is that more developers can work on the project at the same time. Or let's say a developer gets sick and you see all these classes over here. If I have just documented what these classes are and look at the names of them: add, float, divide, int, division, factory, modulus, multiply, subtract, it's probably going to be pretty clear what a new developer is going to have to do to come in and replace my work in case I get sick. So there's a lot of practical reasons why we invest as developers time up front into thinking about how to make code that's reusable, makes sense, is testable, is adaptable, is easily updatable, extendable, things like that. Does that make sense? We're not in a programming competition where you're just, here's an input, give me the output, that's all that matters, as long as it runs under some amount of time. Okay, does anybody have questions about that? Okay. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about that and I was more explicit with it. I have hinted at that, but I don't think we've actually sat down and been explicit with thinking through some of the reasons why you make code. Now, is there a lot of classes here? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13 classes in 4 different packages. Is this a lot of overload? Is it a lot of extra code? Yes, no. It's a lot more classes, but each class is smaller and has a specific purpose. And we'll talk about why that's super important. Now, let's run through this application. Notice I didn't do documentation on all of my application. And the reason I didn't is I wanted to show you how easy it is to document good code. And I'll explain what I mean by that here in a second. So let's take a look at logic. Okay. Logic's kind of complicated. You'll notice Parser has a thing that says it can be final, but input reader interface doesn't give me that. It doesn't have to be final. Okay. Looking at this code here, can anybody tell me why input reader is written the way it is? Sorry about that. Dry weather and cold weather is chapping my lips. Okay, so no answers yet. Somebody just take a guess. It's fine if you're wrong. You probably won't be as wrong as you think. You'll probably be at least partially correct. I was very nice in the way I named things also. You'll see it's an interface and then a reader and command line reader. Well, we have one answer to put in another class to use input validation. Okay. So you're thinking about what the input reader and the parser are in general. You're not thinking about why I would do it this way with the input reader. So that's fine. This is something that becomes apparent with experience in using object-oriented programming. Let's read the input reader interface. And you'll notice I made a comment here. I described it, interface for reading input into the application. Okay. Well, command line reader. What is a command line reader? Reads input from the command line, system.in. Notice it implements this interface and overrides the read input method and returns a string. What does it do? It just runs scanner. Now, why would I go through the hassle of making an interface with the read input method? Does anybody have an idea? I'm spending time, I'm writing extra classes, or there's obviously a reason for it. But why? That's an interesting answer. So it's easier to find when adding or fixing code in specific areas. Not entirely wrong. It's not the main purpose. That's sort of a tangential benefit, but probably not the way that you think that you're implying. Another answer, maybe instead of string, you'd want to input different data type. That's closer. What do you mean by data type? And this would allow for easy implementation. Okay. So that's one answer. What they mean by data type is int or double or something like that. Maybe it's somebody else typing in a suggestion. Let's see what they have to say. So, where in this file do I mention int or float or double? I don't. And there's a reason for that. I'm just reading in the input and I'm getting a string. Now, the next comment is if you wanted to extend the calculator program to a graphical interface. Now, that's not, I mean, that is correct, but let's go one step farther with that answer. It means I can vary this command line by passing in a new reader. Let's say data, or let's do file input reader. Sorry, not extends. Implements input reader interface. Implement the method. There. Now, in our logic or main, logic dot I could do this. I could say, oh, normally I just want to read, I know the default is just read from the command line. And in all programs that yeah, basically, I think almost every program you'll ever write, reading input from the command line, other than in specific cases like Android where you don't have access to the command line, generally, you're going to want the default to be a command line argument or command line interface. Because if you can write a program that's command line interface and it works well, that means you can also add a graphical user interface, or you can make a web interface and through WebSockets or something along those lines that interfaces with the application cleanly and nicely, and it'll have all the full functionality. So I went through the hassle of making an interface, going into logic, storing it as an interface. Notice I don't say this is a command line reader right here. I say it's an input reader interface. So when I'm in logic, I don't care what this is. I don't care what's passed into input reader here. I only care that it implements this interface. Close all of these. Close others. I only care that it gives me the read input method from this interface. Does that make sense? Like, I only care about calling the read input because that's all I do right here. I call the .read input on the interface object, or the instance of that interface, to be more precise. It allows me to toggle implementations. Somebody had a comment. Okay. So now let's look at Parser. What's wrong with Parser? Let's look at the Parser class. It's just a class. It has an inner class, but we'll get to that either today or tomorrow. It has an inner class, but it doesn't have an interface. It's just a single class. come back here to logic, and I'm creating it a parser. And it's even warning me, this parser can be final because you don't ever change it. Well, what's wrong with this versus input reader? Well, I can't change the parser implementation through, let's just make up some logic here. If args.length greater than 0 and args.equals. Okay. So what I just did there is I said, oh, if it ends with .data, actually I don't know if this is exactly right, and it should work. Should work. If it ends with .data, then pass in a new file reader. If I start the application with command line, like, what would this be? Let's say .java space input .data. It would read the data. Versus if I don't have this, at runtime, it will say, oh, there's no command line arguments, just read it from the file. Does that make sense? You can vary actual implementation both from a hard-coded status, like if I just had this would just be hard-coded and run all the time, versus some type of conditional statement where the runtime conditions determine if it's reading from command line or versus reading from a file. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and that's an important concept of why you would design a class, even if there's only one instance of it right now, command line reader. Even when there's only one instance of it, why you would use an interface is because then later, if you think you might be toggling it to something else, you can just say, oh, I have a condition. Now I know I want to read from a file. There we go. We're done. And the file, this application, if I had the data, I think this would work, but the exact syntax doesn't matter. Conceptually, you know what it's doing. And if I had a data file with the input in it, and obviously, if I was actually reading a file here, which I'm not, oops, let's just make that hard-coded, sorry. Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm going to have to disable autocomplete on Well, regardless. But now we get to the point where we could actually test this. We're testing reading versus if we do this, we run it, come down here, 4 plus 4, gives us the answer. So we could test a different implementation. Or we could be testing a different command line implementation. Doesn't mean it has to be a different, reading from a file versus reading from a command line. Does that make sense? You want to be able to toggle, or you think you might want to be able to toggle, so that's why you use an interface. Okay. So let's continue to look through this. That's why I had it set like this, and I didn't for Parser, just to make it make sense. But let's look at this run. This is where all the logic really is. And you'll notice I have some helper methods down here. I highlight them, and you'll see that they show up. Now, is this nested if statement, is this the cleanest solution? No. There are better possible solutions. But, as I said, I will leave it to the reader to investigate. And then here's a nice one. Now, what is this double class thing here? We've done this before. We talked about it. It's a inner class. And why did I make it operator, operand, or operand 1, operand 2? And you'll see results. Oh, it returns the results. This isn't always the best design like this. First of all, you could argue that you should have getters and setters here, obviously. Because right now we're exposing the internal implementation of this. Okay. Well, we could do that. And now there'll be problems with our code. We'll have to go and operand 1. There we go. Get operator. Get operand 2. Operand 2. Get operand 1. Get operator. Run it. 4 plus 4. Still 8. Yay, it worked. Like I said, this isn't a perfect example. But if you'll notice, now Parser, this file's a lot longer, and it took more time to write. But we've hidden the internal implementation of this. So there's costs and benefits. You're always going to be, at this point now, doing costs and benefits. Now, newer languages, Android actually for a long time recommended doing it the other way because of speed. It's actually faster within like milliseconds faster, or even shorter amounts of time faster, to not use getters and setters. But you don't want, that's not a good practice, and they've moved away from that. That was a very old practice. So here's an R, here's the results. Notice I still can use r.operator inside Parser in operand 1 and operand 2 because results is an inner class of Parser. So it knows that this class here, Parser, it's fine for it to know the inner workings of results. And it's fine to save the time. Does that make sense? I know this is a little convoluted, having the results here, but here's the question. Why did I do this? Why did I make a results class here? I haven't answered that, but you should be able to at least guess why I did that. Yes, that is correct. Somebody said it is to return both ints and the operator at the same time, and that's correct. Java, you can only return a single value. So you have to make that value, that single value, into something that contains multiple values in it. There's other languages where you can return tuples or triplets, but Java doesn't have that right now, at least. So that's why I had to make a results object. So somebody says they were trying to do this, but they couldn't figure out how. This is the cleanest way that I've found, is to have just an inner class like this. And I find it, so you could do it either in an inner class or a separate class. If only Parser is going to return this results class, then I like it to be an inner class like this. Because let's look at where results is used. In logic. Logic knows about Parser already. It has a parser. And so the only thing using Parser.results is the thing already using Parser. So that's why I like the more tightly coupling of the object. Now, if it's, let's talk about this add. I don't like the auto formatting when it does that. Here's a add method, or add class. Come down here to logic. Do we import the add class? No, we don't. So logic doesn't know about the add class, but it can use an add class. That's interesting. We'll get back to that. But my point was, if results was used by multiple classes, I might think about pulling it out. But because it only you can only get a results class from Parser, I like this inner class methodology. And this is just something you'll learn as you develop where you should use inner classes and where you should use anonymous inner classes and where you should use named inner classes that are private. These are all, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just more wrong answers than other answers. And so it's a balancing act. Generally, if only Parser can generate this, then I think it's okay to put it in the class. Does that make sense? That's a general good rule of thumb. So, alright, we've talked about Parser a little, and this is the code that I gave you before. Maybe slight alterations. The try and catch. So this tries to parse the int. So if you can't parse the int, it will catch the number format exception and return R, which is a new result. or I'm sorry, it'll set R to null and return it. And that will notify the application that didn't work. Does that make sense? So we're using null as a flag to notify that the operation in here didn't work. There's differences of opinion on whether that's good practice or not. I tend to like it in a language that supports null when you're doing a return like this, because you can go to parse and you can check is results equal null. If not, print the error. Else it's not null. Let's do the rest of our logic. Does that make sense? Why I would return null there as a flag of an error. Nobody has any questions about that? Okay. So, math operand factory. Now, here, math operand factory, I get a little sleight of handy with how I make this work. I have an enum here, and these enums have a string and a math operator. Why is it warning me? Oh, whatever. Private can be, these can be final. And you don't technically need private. Whatever. That's fine. This is a nice way of making a list of items when you know they're not going to change. So enumeration, a list of things. So a good list of things would be the planets. And that's generally the example they always give is you go through and Mercury, Mars, Earth, or no, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And then you go down the list, and then you might give them their AU, so their distance to the sun. You might give their mass or estimated mass. You might give whether they're a rocky planet or a gas giant, or if they're a Plutoid. But this use of it isn't good. And that's why I wanted to show you, like, this is very clean. This is super clean and super simple. And to add assignment 2, literally all I do is uncomment that, come up here to Parser, and done. I have assignment 2. I had to make the new classes, but that's it. Make sure it still runs. 5 modulus 3. 5 divided by 3 goes into a once. What's the remainder of 5 divided by 3? That's 2. So it works. But, where was I? Parser? No. Yeah, math operand factory. It is super simple to go a for loop here and check if it's equal to this character or string. And if so, return the math operator, which is the method here, or the class with the math op base type. But, or what is math op? Yeah, it's an interface. Okay, that makes sense. You all understand this, right? This is pretty straightforward. The syntax is a little weird, but you get used to it. You come down here, here's the variables that it's being stored as, and here's the constructors, or the constructor. And the constructor is called when you have each one of these in order. Okay. So there's problems with this. I'll come up here. Who can tell me what the problem is? Or one of them. There's several, actually. Yes, the question is there something else that could be used besides enum for the math operators? Yes, there is. And I would actually recommend you do that instead of an enum. I did it this way because I wanted to show you that you can do things like this, but not that this is necessarily the right way to do it. And we're going to continue to talk about the better ways of doing this. And maybe there's a pattern or a couple of patterns when used together that makes a better solution to this. Dun, dun, dun. So, anybody have any suggestions of why this isn't a good solution? No? Okay. Well, here's the first one. There's a for loop here. Well, that is very concise code-wise. But what happens when there's, I don't know, 1,000 of these possibilities? Or maybe even 10,000? Maybe we're not just doing multiplication and division. Maybe we're doing verbs in the English language. It can go very slow. Now, are there better solutions? Yes. Do they require more code? Yes. And you're doing a string comparison here, which is basically one of the slowest types of comparisons you can do. No, for our purposes here, the loop is not best. It is fast to write, and so was this math operators for me because I happen to know how enums work quite well. So this was fast for me to write, but it wasn't the best code. So that's specifically why I said this is not the best code. What we're going to do is look at this code and discuss why it has problems. First of all, look at float divide. I'm not checking if it divide by 0. That's a problem. So, yes, that's correct. It's fast to write, but not best for running the actual program. And there's actually a bigger problem. Running the program is slower, or could be, but it's bad design because let's look carefully between. Let's close all these tabs and Parser. First of all, here's one issue. I'm typing this plus sign twice. What happens if I delete this plus sign from here? And this is a complex regular expression. How am I going to get a plus sign here? I can't get to here. Well, I can get to here, but I'll have a plus sign. Or no, actually, I won't get to here. If I try to do plus, it will say it's formatted wrong. So that's one issue. This duplication of the plus sign. This is a subtle issue. And sometimes you just have to accept it, but whenever you have we'll call this a magic string, because this is a magic string here. Whenever you have magic strings that are important, you need to centrally locate them in a single place so that you don't have magic strings elsewhere in the app that disagree. This is super important in Android, where it uses more magic strings than I would like. So, or at least did. They're moving away from it, but not regex. Registry. The Windows registry is basically a .ini, a initial configuration file that is initialization file? I forget what that stands for actually offhand. But it's a bunch of magic strings and variables and parameters that define how your program works. So nowadays, a lot of people don't mess with the registry in Windows, but it's still there and it's still significant. And so you try not to have magic strings in multiple places. So if we're not going to use an enum, but we want the characters to only be in a single place, I will leave it to you. It'll be your homework until next class. Try and look at the design patterns from the original Gang of Four and think about which ones or how you could use those to solve this problem. There won't be any actual submitted essay or anything like that. Just something for you to think about. So, also, oh yes, I wanted to talk about this. I had planned on our exam being on the 28th. I'm thinking of moving it to be the 29th, actually, being due. Because the 28th during class, there is, at the Oak Hill Collaborative, there are 2 talks that I think would be very beneficial if anybody would like to go. And I'm thinking of offering extra credit for the course for people that go. Would people be interested in that? Oak Hill Collaborative, if you're not familiar, it's like 5-minute drive from downtown YSU's campus. So, let me find what the talks are. Events. Okay, well, it's not showing up properly. Let's, here we go. Sorry about that. James Cleeth is a Micronaut developer lead at Object Computing Incorporated. His talk is Who Said Java Was Slow? Micronaut is a modern framework for building applications on the JVM. And then Neil Primer, he's a senior software engineer at Granular. He's going to talk about CI/CD anti-patterns. CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous development. Let's see. If you're on campus, maybe we could do class rideshare if anybody's interested. I'll leave that up to you. I won't be part of that. If you have friends you want to go with, etc. I will link the information for everybody. And so what I'm thinking of, there's 2 20-minute talks. So, I apologize. The doors start at 6, open at 6, talks at 6:30. So it's after class. Oh, that is depressing. I thought it was exactly during class. All right, well, I will post the information and we'll talk about it. And then we'll go from there. Good. Yeah. But regardless, what I'm thinking of is adjusting the exact timing of the exam. Yeah, it'll be similar, basically exact same format, short answer. I'll also have multiple choice. There might be a couple of code snippets that you need to complete, and it will be on Blackboard. I might give you, I'm still deciding exactly how I want to structure it, but that's what I'm saying is you'll have probably an hour to an hour and a half to complete it, and then sometime within a time window to actually work on it. So you could do it during class period or not. That would be up to you. Yeah, I will figure out the exact specifics of how the exam delivery will work, and I'll let you know before Tuesday, the 26th. So, but it is upcoming. It will be the 27th, 28th, or 29th, somewhere in that range. You'll be able to work on it. I will have the exams turned back to you and graded before the 31st. That way you'll have an exam, some quizzes, some assignments, and you'll be able to judge your standing in the course. So far it looks like everybody's doing pretty well, so I don't think anybody will need to drop, but that's a personal decision that you'll have to make yourself. If there's no other questions at 6:25, I will stay on for a little bit if there's more questions. Otherwise, you're free to head out, and we'll end class here. Okay, no other questions, then we'll go ahead and finish up here, and you all have a good evening.